I resume my duties as the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. Sir, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. My country's delegation has taken note of the Secretary General's report on Resolution 2585, and we listened attentively to the briefing delivered by Mr. Martin Griffiths. We wish to deliver the following remarks. First, with respect to access across the front lines, the Syrian government continues to spare no effort to facilitate the operations of the United Nations as well as those of its specialized agencies in order to implement the mandate in Resolution 2585. As the Turkish regime and the terrorist groups helping it continue to create obstacles to this. Cooperation between the UN and Syria in late August provided for a WFP humanitarian convoy from Aleppo to Sabbagh in northwestern Syria. In response, a hysterical aggression campaign was carried out by the Turkish regime and terrorist affiliates. The cargo, as a result, was not distributed. It took months for it to be distributed, and this also obstructed another convoy for Sabbagh dating 9 November during the visit of Mr. Beasley, the WFP director, to Aleppo. Terrorist organizations have been targeting cross points and itineraries of these convoys with missiles. Another convoy scheduled for 28 was also blocked. The Syrian government is wedded to providing access from inside to the entire country, authorized and accepted the 6-month plan, which was presented by the United Nations, and welcomed this plan in record time. And this resulted in the delivery of convoys of both food and non-food items from the WFP, from UNICEF and UNFPA to Sabbagh dating 9 December. What was achieved by the Syrian state to improve access across front lines in the northwest should be applauded by the Security Council. We regret the fact that the report did not call a spade and did not explicitly and clearly point to the responsibility of the Turkish regime and its terrorist affiliates with respect to their obstructing implementation of the mandate. On the northeast, the report confirmed that access was made possible for most of the deliveries. 625 trucks were delivered, and there was an air bridge. The report also notes that the Syrian government authorized the UNICEF and WHO convoy through Alas al-Adiyad with vaccine equipment for COVID-19. We emphasize that my country's government authorized a humanitarian assessment mission of the United Nations to that region. This was the 6th authorization granted by the Syrian government and their implementation of Resolution 2585, and this also coincided with the emergence of the Secretary General's report, which confirmed that all access requests were granted by the Syrian government. Turning to Rukban, the report affirms that humanitarian access in that area is beyond reach. We would have hoped that the report would shed light on the reasons which prevented this access, reasons which we already set out in detail before you. These reasons are directly linked to the illegitimate presence of the U.S. forces in the area and their sponsorship of the Marawid al-Fawra organization, which is a terrorist organization. We emphasize the need for this ignominious camp to be closed because it continues to exacerbate the suffering of the Syrian people and it continues to help armed groups. Now, turning to greater transparency for the cross-border mechanism. We wish to reiterate our position in principle. We reject this politicized mechanism. This constitutes an egregious violation of the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. We reject this mechanism due to the shortcomings which undermine its action, specifically its failure to guarantee that assistance reach beneficiaries, not terrorist organizations. The Secretary General's report states that cross-border humanitarian operations are fraught with risk and that this demonstrates the validity of our position regarding this mechanism. The report mentions the fact that the operation is managed remotely and that part of the area covered is under the control of a local authority, which is generally admitted and accepted to have close ties with non-state armed groups, which have been designated by the Security Council as terrorist organizations. This means that it is possible that the organizations divert that assistance. We also are stunned at the exaggeration contained in the report with respect to the number of individuals in need in the Northwest, stating the report that access inside the country complements and cannot replace cross-border action is not objective, and it is based on assessments which are not realistic. The facts demonstrate that meaningful, sincere cooperation with the Syrian government and greater initiatives along the front line help to achieve the sought-after goals and help to avoid the shortcomings and risks inherent in the cross-border mechanism. Third, with respect to rapid recovery programs, we regret that some Western countries, with respect to the so-called community of donors in particular, blocked the implementation of a large number of projects and increased their number. The countries posed unjustified questions regarding the definition of what an early recovery project is. These countries have also rejected the adoption of a strategic framework for cooperation between the Syrian government and the United Nations at the humanitarian level. This was despite the tremendous flexibility that was demonstrated by the Syrian government. These countries continue to politicize humanitarian and development initiatives and continue to strive to attach conditions to the provision of delivery. Otherwise, how can we explain the fact that financing for the humanitarian response plan was reduced by more than $200 million, despite the increasing humanitarian needs? We wish to note that some of these early recovery projects mentioned in the report have been implemented for years, even before the adoption of Resolution 2585. We would also have hoped that a list of vital new projects to contribute to resilience, to improve the humanitarian situation, to facilitate the dignified, safe return of displaced persons. We would have liked to have seen that mentioned, but it is nothing new that some members of the Security Council did not even hide their hostility vis-a-vis Resolution 2585 and the provisions thereof. We will not reveal the names of these countries. However, we regret the fact that the report has disregarded one of the catastrophic consequences of the illegitimate, immoral, inhumane siege imposed by the United States of America and by the European Union against the Syrian people. We call for an immediate, unconditional lifting of these illegal coercive measures, which have caused the suffering of every Syrian individual to worsen. To be clear, Mr. President, any objective assessment of the complexities revolving the humanitarian situation in Syria lead us to one conclusion. That conclusion is that the root cause behind the situation is the Turkish regime, its practices, its crimes, its sponsorship of terrorist organizations and entities which are its affiliates in the north and northwest of my country. On a number of occasions, we submitted to your August Council in a number of ways a detailed description of the practices of the Turkish regime and the way it carries out these crimes targeting the Syrian people, specifically stripping access to water and the imposition of Turkization. All of this should prompt the Security Council to compel the Turkish regime to cease these practices and to be held accountable with respect to these crimes and these attempts to undermine stability in Syria by, for example, obstructing the provision of convoys across the lines and the implementation of the 6-month plan. On that plan, we cannot but, furthermore, emphasize the practices of U.S. forces. Their presence in the northeast of Syria is illegitimate. These are forces supporting separatist militias and facilitate the efforts of NGOs as they seek to lead illegal piracy, cross-border piracy operations through Fish Habur crossing point. This is at variance, of course, with resolutions of the Security Council, and these parties exploit humanitarian assistance as a pretext to violate my country's sovereignty. The most recent practice of these forces is to bring in a large amount of wheat grains with dangerous diseases through the Simalka crossing point. And this, the purpose of this is to exacerbate the suffering of the Syrian people and to worsen economic damage for the Syrian economy. We have heard the statement of Mr. Geir Peterson, and a few days ago in Damascus, there were talks with the foreign minister, as well as with the co-chair of the national delegation to the Constitutional Committee meeting. The Syrian Arab Republic remains committed to a political solution based on intra-Syrian dialogue, a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned dialogue advancing the aspirations of the Syrian people to guarantee full respect for the sovereignty, independence, unity, and integrity of Syria. We eagerly await the 7th session of the Constitutional Committee. We applaud the positive contribution of the national delegation to its work. However, we note that external parties should refrain from meddling in the work of this committee or creating other obstacles by imposing artificial timelines or prejudging its conclusions. In a number of statements, there was mention made of the need for a comprehensive ceasefire. We emphasize that to achieve this, there's a need to neutralize the terrorist organizations active in some parts of the country, specifically Daesh and Al-Nusra Front, as well as their affiliates. There is also a need to end the Turkish occupation and the U.S. illegitimate presence. This is necessary to establish the authority of the Syrian government throughout all of our territory and to restore security and stability. We further believe that national reconciliation and local reconciliation, such as was seen recently in Dara and Deir ez-Zor and in other areas, are a step forward in that direction. We note that the cooperation of the Syrian state in the efforts carried out by our Russian friends has resulted in the release of a number of detainees and abductees, and this was despite all of the efforts of the Turkish side and allies to block that humanitarian initiative. To conclude, Mr. President, I wish to take this opportunity to thank you, to thank your delegation, as well as the delegations of Tunisia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Vietnam for your efforts. As members at the Security Council, we are grateful for your objectivity. Thank you. I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.